Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have a 6-part series written by kazthemurphyfan by the name of Every Night My Son Stares Out His Bedroom Window. This is all 6 parts in one video, so you don't have to go searching for the other parts. I figure it's easier to do it that way. Please be sure to drop a like if you think this video is worthy of one. Let's see if we can reach 1,300 likes. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Be sure to share this video on your socials if you would like to. Telling a friend also helps out. Anyway, enjoy, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Part 1. This post may be a bit long, so I apologize for that in advance. For some background information, I'm twice divorced, and I have an 8-year-old son. His name is Ethan. I had him with my first wife, whom I divorced about 4 years ago because we just weren't getting along anymore. We still don't to this day. However, we do set up a time every now and then for Ethan to go out and see his mother. Whether it's going out and getting ice cream, going to a museum, etc. Our house is not that big. I bought it about a year ago, and since it would be just us and our cat Ziggy, I figured to just get a 1-story house. It's just a living room, a kitchen, a couple bathrooms, my bedroom, his bedroom, and a guest room. So yeah, not really exciting. Ethan's room is manifested with superhero shit. Posters, notebooks. He loves to draw. Pretty beautiful stuff, actually. And even his bed sheet. If I had to say how much money I spent on his room, I'd say about at least $2,000. That's how much stuff he has. I work as a store clerk at Walmart, but I do make some really good money, surprisingly. Ethan's a great kid. If anything ever happened to him, I would go out and try to save him, even if I die in the process. Now, I decided to take a few weeks off from work, because I have worked non-stop every weekday for 10 months, ever since January of this year, so I stayed home, and weekends, if Ethan wasn't doing anything with his mother, were really fun. He went to school Monday through Friday, of course, so I really only have Ziggy as company when I sit down, crack open a beer, and relax all day. A few days ago is when things started to get a little strange. Ethan's room is literally only a few steps away from mine, so I can see whatever he is doing in there, even when I'm laying down, watching TV, or doing stuff on my phone. To the left of his bed is a big window, which looks out into the nearby forest and half of our driveway. It was the middle of the night. I don't remember what time it was exactly. The moon was looming in the sky, brightening up the sky. You wouldn't think it's nearing morning. It was also pretty windy. Even with the loud fan I have in my room, you can still hear it. I woke up to the wind blasting into a tree, and a tree branch slamming into the house, and it shook me awake. I was breathing heavily because even though I'm past my 20s, it still scared me a little bit. I turned my head and looked into Ethan's room to see if he was asleep. He wasn't. In fact, he was out of his bed, standing in front of his bedroom window, staring out at, well, wasn't too sure. I was feeling a mixture of confusion and worry. He wasn't moving, not a muscle. You would think he turned into a statue. I petted Ziggy, who was laying down on my pillow next to my head, and got up to start slowly walking out of my room into Ethan's room. It was even more surreal when I got closer to him. He still wasn't moving, Even when I said his name when I walked in, he didn't react in the slightest, and even his breathing was very little. I moved a little closer to look at his face. He didn't look at me. He wasn't moving his eyes. He was just looking straight ahead. I looked out the window to look at whatever the hell he was looking at. I saw nothing. It was just the forest and half of the driveway. Nothing was out there. I grabbed Ethan by the shoulders and started to shake him to snap him out of it, but he was still not reacting. He still kept looking straight ahead at the window, and it wasn't until I turned his head to look at me when he finally reacted to what I was doing. When I did this, he started blinking a ton of times and looking around, confused, clueless on what just happened. "What?" Ethan said, sort of murmuring it. "What were you looking at?" I asked him, still holding on to his shoulders. I kneeled to one knee to meet his height. I don't know. I don't remember anything." I didn't say anything else to him. I just picked him up, tucked him back into bed, said goodnight to him, and went back to sleep myself. The next night the same thing happened. I woke up in the middle of the night because of the wind again. The time was about 3 a.m. and I yet again saw Ethan up from bed, in the same spot staring out of the window, not moving. I sighed, got up, and slowly walked into his room and said his name. He didn't react and didn't move. Not even a little bit. I was getting annoyed. I walked closer to him and saw again that his eyes were just staring straight ahead out the window. I looked out again to see if there was anything out there this time. And there wasn't. And I thought in my head that this was getting ridiculous. I turned his face to me again, and just like the other night, he started blinking a ton of times and looked clueless. "Buddy, you need some sleep. Quit getting up to look out your window." I pick him up and put him back into his bed. "I don't remember getting up, I swear," Ethan exclaims to me. I tell him to quiet down so he doesn't wake the neighbors, and tell him I don't have time for this. We say goodnight to each other. He goes back to sleep, and I do too. Yesterday night, the same exact thing happened. And I'm not going to go through it for the third time because it was the same as the last 2 nights. I woke up, saw Ethan staring out his window, not moving again and just looking straight ahead, not reacting to anything I said to him. However, this time when I walked into his room, I saw a piece of paper on his bed. Now, earlier at dinner, Ethan was drawing something with a new crayon pack I had bought him earlier that day. Though I wasn't paying attention, as I was watching a football game and eating my ham and cheese sandwich, but I could tell that Ethan was focused on his drawing. I could tell it was the same drawing, so I took another skeptical look at my oblivious son and picked the piece of paper up, and to no surprise, it was a drawing. I didn't take a good look at it yet, and it already looked tremendously detailed. But when I took a look at the actual drawing, with the current situation going on, I was disturbed. Ethan had drew a boy that represented himself, staring out a window with the words at the top of the paper, "I see it." That had disturbed me because it was extremely vague, and it had scratchy handwriting, and Ethan's handwriting is typically very nice. I put the paper in my pocket, not sure what to even think of what I had saw, and snapped Ethan out of the phase he was in, getting more mad at him this time around, but he still claimed he didn't remember getting up from bed. I put him back to bed as normal. I stayed up a little bit more when I got back in my bed, studying the picture really closely, as if I had lost my vision, and I had to put my head really close to the paper and squint just to see it. My son had never drawn anything cryptic before, let alone said anything cryptic. So not only did this picture concern me, it honestly kind of scared me. What could there possibly be about that window that causes Ethan to get up every night and stare out of it? I put the drawing in the drawer of my nightstand, and I went to sleep. Today was normal. Ethan had school off today, and I had a lot of fun activities planned for the day. I also let him know that tomorrow he would be going over to hang out with his mother for the day, and he seemed pretty excited to hear that news. My ex-wife had more money than me, so she could afford to take Ethan out on better trips than I ever could. I didn't let that get in the way, though. Me and Ethan went out and played in the park. We swung on the swings and slid down the slides, and he even made a couple of new friends there, too. And as a parent, that's always great to see. We went to see the new Ron's Gone Wrong movie, which Ethan loved, and I'll admit, I liked it as well. The last thing we did that day was going to a petting zoo, which costed $60 damn just to let us both in. They practically stole my money, but all I cared about was Ethan having fun and interacting with the animals. He loved the goats so much that he cried when we had to leave and go home. The last thing we did was Ethan telling me a story he wrote in school yesterday after I cooked dinner. And it was childish, but I couldn't help myself but laugh at a couple of parts. I hadn't mentioned him and his window at all to him. I didn't really want that conversation. That night I struggled to go to sleep because I was worried that Ethan would get up in the middle of the night again and stare out of his window, but nonetheless, the background noise of the TV in my room helped me put myself to sleep. I woke in the middle of the night again to what sounded like footsteps outside. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, and all I could think was that I just wanted to go back to sleep, but then I remembered about how in the previous 3 nights, Ethan had gotten up to stare out of his window, and I dreaded looking and seeing it again because I was getting tired of it. I wanted to spend my midnight asleep, not putting my son back to bed, so I checked as Ziggy meowed at me. He wasn't up and staring out of his bedroom window. You would think that was a good thing, but it wasn't. I would have actually preferred him to be staring out of his bedroom window, because as I type this, and as I'm currently calling the cops, Ethan isn't in his bed. He isn't anywhere in the house. Part 2. Thank you to those who found and read my first post, and the few who expressed worry and hope for my son in the replies. I appreciate it. However, the situation isn't getting much better. This is going to be another long post. This happened all in one day, so bear with me here. Mere seconds after I wrote my first post, I got up, slid my sandals on, and practically sprinted out of the door to go look for Ethan. I could hear police sirens in the distance, since I was on the phone with them the entire time I wrote my last post, so it's no surprise they'd be here quick for a missing child's case. The street was quiet, and it was freezing outside, thus it didn't help that my pajama shirt was short-sleeved. I started walking around my house, calling out my son's name, hoping that he'd hear me and come back. No matter how loud I called his name, I saw no signs of him anywhere. Yes, I know it's inconsiderate of me to be yelling at the top of my lungs in the middle of the street when it's the middle of the night, but in the corner of my eye, in the dark forest right next to our house, I saw him. I just barely saw Ethan walking around, almost like a robot, in the forest, struggling to get under branches and through bushes. Instinctively, I ran like I've never ran before as cop cars started to pull up to my house, and a ton of cops got out of their cars. I slammed my body through branches, breaking them from the trees they were a part of, not caring that I was getting bruised. And I made it. and swooped Ethan off his feet, hugging him tightly. I was so worried about him, and it's a miracle he wasn't able to get any farther. Minutes later, we were sitting at our dining room table as a detective was sitting across from us questioning Ethan. The detective was asking Ethan simple questions like, "How's your home life? Does your dad treat you good?" And Ethan answered all of this, saying that his home life was great and how I always take care of him and treat him gently, which is all true. It all started to get unnerving when the detective asked Ethan another simple question. "Why did you run away?" This was the question that I was wanting to know. As a parent, it's the question you want to know the most, and what he said made my concern for his safety go from 100% to about 200%. Ethan answered this question saying, "A voice told me so." He said this in such a sweet, naive, and unworried manner. Ethan is only 8 years old, so he doesn't understand the true meaning and horror that sentence had to us. What voice was he talking about? I had to call and wake my ex-wife up after that, which I'm sure was fun for her, having her ex-husband calling her in the dark and early hours of the morning. She picked up sounding groggy and annoyed, and I instantly regretted calling her to tell her about Ethan running away, but I couldn't just hang up now, so I told her. Her hatred for me was even higher now than before. She was irate. She was yelling at me through the phone, so much that I thought she was going to destroy her vocal cords like an exploding building. She was degrading me heavily, calling me stuff like a terrible father, a son of a bitch, scum of the earth, worthless motherfucker. And all of that stuff was probably true, but I didn't let her tell that it was getting to me. I'm a mentally strong person, but I'm quickly turning into a mentally weak person after the night before. And what was happening then? It was still very early in the morning, so I put Ethan back to bed before he had to go see his mother for the day. Many of our neighbors were coming over to see what was going on, concerned about the whole situation, but the police told them to stay away until they get everything figured out. I looked outside to look at one of my neighbors, Mrs. Johnson. The entire neighborhood was being lit up by red and blue lights. After I called my ex-wife and put my son to bed, I walked up to the detective, whom was in the kitchen writing on a piece of paper. I told him I wanted to speak to him about something, and he reluctantly agreed and put his paper and pen down on the counter. I was contemplating if I should mention the whole window thing going on with Ethan, but I figured that it was best to, so I told him everything. How the other 3 nights before, Ethan had been getting up from bed in the middle of the night to stare out his bedroom window. I even ran towards my room and retrieved the cryptic drawing that Ethan had drawn the other night and showed it to the detective. He took a good look at it and was equally as disturbed. He took what I was saying seriously, luckily. The detective cleared his throat and looked at me, almost hesitatingly. "Listen, there's something I need to tell you." The detective started to tell me. I looked at him. "What is it?" I replied to him. The detective started nervously tapping on the kitchen counter and looking down at his black boots, but he didn't continue what he was saying. "You know what? Never mind. You have a good night and keep your son safe." The detective said while patting my shoulder. He started to walk out of the house, telling the rest of the police in my house that the search was over and that they could close the case. I waved to the detective, but a part of me was desperate to find out what the detective was going to tell me before he changed his mind. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I just stayed up in the living room with the TV on, though I wasn't paying attention to the TV. I had my head in my hands just thinking about what I've been going through every single night. What was happening to my boy? I started worrying that something was going on with him mentally, and that almost made me cry. I wanted to make sure Ethan was really okay, figure out why he's always staring out of his window and what voice told him to run away. Ziggy was there to comfort me, as she jumped onto the couch with me and meowed in my face. She may be just a cat, but she could always tell when I was going through something. 8 a.m. rolled around soon enough, and it was about the same time Ethan was waking up. I walked to his room and told him good morning, as he smiled and said good morning back. He was acting as if nothing had happened just hours earlier. Shortly after, he showered and brushed his teeth as I got his clothes for the day out and I fed the cat. When Ethan was out of the shower and dressed, I helped him comb his hair in a new style he wanted, and I think I did a great job. Ethan loved how he looked with it, and it made me happy to see that he was happy with something I did. His mother came to pick him up shortly after. We looked at each other but didn't exchange any words. I said bye to Ethan, and he told me that he wished that I could go with him and his mother. That made my smile fade, knowing that Ethan has witnessed a lot of my arguments I've had with my two ex-wives. I knew I should have done a better job trying to maintain my relationship so Ethan wouldn't go through the struggle of me divorcing someone. I watched them drive off, and after I saw the car drive up the long hill towards our house and turn out of sight, I suddenly felt overwhelmingly tired. I couldn't think of anything else to do except for going into my room and just sleep for a while. I needed something to do that would take my mind off of everything that has been happening. So I let myself drop onto my bed, and I fell asleep relatively quickly. I woke up about 5 hours later, at 1 p.m. I yawned, and was glad that I took that nap because I felt relaxed and, for the first time in 4 days, not worried. For a majority of the day, I watched a couple of shows, made myself something to eat since Ethan would be out for a long time, and went on a refreshing walk through the neighborhood. At around 7 p.m., after my walk, I decided to go into Ethan's room to see if I could find anything that could possibly answer my question on Ethan and his obsession with his window, and, hopefully, the voice. I creeped into his room, and at first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing was really different. I looked at the window and shook my head. I went through his closet. Nothing but toys and books. I looked through his bed. Nothing. I looked through his desk, and I found something. It was a big stack of papers, and I could tell that they were all drawings. They were definitely new ones, as I've never seen these drawings before. I hadn't seen Ethan draw anything for a while, unless he was drawing when he was supposed to be asleep last night. I was about to leave them alone when I remembered the drawing he made 2 nights ago. The drawing that showed him staring out his window. The words, "I see it." When I had that thought, I immediately snatched the batch of drawings and took them into my room to check them out, hoping that they would be something. Another side of me just hoped that they were simply regular drawings of superheroes, plants, and animals. They weren't. It was more cryptic drawings. I consider them even more cryptic than the last one. There had to be at least 6 drawings, so I'll try running through them all the best I remember. The first one was a very tall figure, his head reaching the top of the page, and it was all black with a red outline and pale white eyes. It was just a drawing, but I felt like the thing Ethan had drawn was staring directly at me. It looked like a literal demon. The second one is one that is going to stick with me for a long time. I'm not sure how I can even explain it. It was a drawing of Ethan in his bed, asleep, and he had drawn his room perfectly. It looked like an exact blueprint. I was blown away before I remembered what I was dealing with. Then I saw that he had drawn his window in his room as well, and staring through his window from outside was just a dark face with red eyes staring in at him. And Ethan had put so much detail into those eyes that I could tell that whatever this was had violent intent. The third one was of me. It was a drawing of me on the floor bleeding out. That's all the picture was. I don't know how I can explain how I was feeling. All I remember at that moment was that my heart literally stopped beating. It felt like time had stopped at that very second. I persisted and kept going through the drawings. The fourth one was of Ethan, walking through the same forest I saw him in last night, but at the end of the paper, I saw a drawing of the same creature that was on the first drawing, seemingly trying to lure Ethan towards him. The drawing of the forest looked almost identical to the actual one, so I was mind blown again. I kept going through the drawings. The fifth one was just a drawing of Ethan walking out a door. It looked unfinished, scribbled, and rushed, as if you were rushing to get your homework done in class before it was due, but I'm sure it represented Ethan walking out of the house when he was running away. I'm not sure. The sixth one? The sixth one was of Ethan holding a large kitchen knife and walking into his room, and Ziggy on his bed with the slight view we see of his room, since he had drawn his door being slightly open. All the drawings were beautiful pieces of art, but they all made me scared, nervous, worried. Especially the sixth one. Why would he draw these? Ethan's actions as of late have been making me question my credentials as a father. Was I doing a good job of parenting my kid if he was drawing shit like this? I felt a sudden urge to drink. I left the papers on my bed, tiredly made my way out to the kitchen and opened the liquor cabinet, and hopelessly took out a whiskey bottle and poured myself a glass. I chugged the whiskey down, swallowed it, and started shaking uncontrollably. I poured another glass of whiskey and chugged it down again. I was about to pour myself yet another glass before I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Ethan was home. I already felt like I was going to pass out, so I put the whiskey bottle back in the liquor cabinet and put my glass in the dishwasher and awaited Ethan to show up the front door so I could open it. I rested my head on the kitchen counter before he knocked on the door, feeling sick from the whiskey I had drunk so fast. I don't want to be drunk. Not now. I walked to the door and opened it, and Ethan walked in and hugged me. I hugged him back and looked at my ex-wife. I think she could tell that I had just been drinking, and gave me the face that signified that she unapproved. My feet hurt a lot, Ethan tells me. I chuckle. Why's that, buddy? I ask him, kneeling a bit. We did a lot of hiking today, and I got to see a lot of ducks in the river. He replies, making swimming hand movements. I could hear my ex-wife laughing. We sure did. I'll see you another time, all right? She says to him, avoiding my gaze. Ethan simply says okay, and she leaves, walking down the porch towards her car. I closed the door since she didn't have the courtesy of doing that for us. I start walking him to his room since it was time for bed, and he could tell that something was up with me. I must have looked tired and pained. What's wrong? He says, looking up at me. I looked back at him and saw the sincerity on his face. The innocence. I brushed it off as just being tired and wanting to get to bed early tonight. He seemed to believe that. Ziggy ran into his room since she likes to alternate between our rooms nearly every night, and Ethan seemed excited to finally sleep with Ziggy again. I had also noticed that she's been sleeping in my room a lot lately. Why hasn't Ziggy been sleeping in your room? I ask Ethan as he walks into his room. He turns back to me, looks at me, and shrugs. I don't know. I think it was the first day of your break from work. He responds, not sounding entirely sure in his statement. I realized that on the first day of my break from work, that was when Ethan had started getting up every night to stare out of his window. I was hoping that it wouldn't happen again tonight. I didn't think too much about it though, and told Ethan to get a good sleep since he had school in the morning, and closed the door as he was getting under his covers with Ziggy. I got in my bed, turned the TV on as a background noise, and went to sleep without a hitch. I woke up to what sounded like whimpers coming from Ethan's room. Not just any kind of whimpering, but it sounded like distressed whimpering that I could tell was getting lower every second. I turned my head to see the door to Ethan's room open. I automatically knew something had to have been wrong because I distinctly remembered that I had closed his door before going into my room to sleep. So I got up to check it out, and the first step I made getting up from my bed made a loud creak in the floor. I winced at the sound. I made my way to his room and opened the door a little bit more so I could see the entirety of his room. It was something straight out of a horror movie. I saw my son holding a large kitchen knife, just standing still, breathing heavily. I noticed there was blood all over the knife and all over his shirt and face, and for a second, I seriously thought he stabbed himself or something before I looked down a little bit more. On the edge of Ethan's bed was Ziggy. Ziggy's entire body was cut all the way open like an unzipped jacket, and there was blood all over the edge of the bed, and blood was still dripping from her body, her fur turning to a crimson color. I realized shortly that was the source of the whimpering, and it was too late to save Ziggy. Ethan had killed her. I looked back up to face my son, terrified of the realization that hit me like a pile of bricks. He had absolutely no remorse on his face. That's when I looked into his eyes. Ethan's eyes? They weren't his eyes. Part 3. Sorry for this post being a little bit late. Everything that has transpired since then has had my mind up in a whirl. And I don't know if I'm in the right state of mind anymore to continue doing this. And also, this all happened in the span of 2 days, and I don't know how to explain it correctly. This is going to be another long post. Another apology in advance. Right after I discovered my son murdered our cat ruthlessly and looked into his eyes, I started walking backwards, out of his room in fear, nearly tripping backwards multiple times. I closed his room door and I held my back against it and started trying to think, what the actual fuck do I do? As I was trying to think of logical situations to do in this kind of scenario. Ethan started slamming his entire body into the door, trying to break it down, and it completely caught me off guard. Ethan was quite a small kid, and these bangs were hard, as if someone was throwing a bowling ball the size of Godzilla into the door. It was scary, because I knew then something was definitely wrong with my son. I could confirm it at that very moment. I was trying to not step away from the door at all, just keeping myself pressed against it, praying that Ethan wouldn't break it down and try to kill me as well. I know he's just a kid, and I can easily overpower him, but he's my son. I would never place my hands on him to do something violent. After what seemed like hours, he finally stopped trying to break down the door, and I heard him drop the knife to the floor and let himself fall onto the mattress of his bed. I put my hand on my chest and calmed my breathing. I looked at the door and saw it had very nearly broke down. No surprise, because multiple times I could hear the wood in the door snapping. I opened the door to his room slightly and saw Ethan was passed out on his bed, unconscious, his head not even on his pillow. Then I saw Ziggy, that poor cat. I didn't leave her there. I picked her up despite about the gallon of blood spilling onto my hands as I picked her lifeless body and saw even more blood on the bed. That she must have been laying on that I couldn't see before. I took time to clean the blood off her fur, doing it gently as if she was still alive, even though I knew it didn't matter if I did it rough. I then brought her body outside and buried her in our backyard, giving her a proper resting place, trying not to cry the whole time, deciding to contain my emotions until I got inside and got done with the task as I shoveled dirt onto her corpse. That's what I did. I think I cried all the way up until the creak of dawn. I wasn't just crying because my cat was dead. I was also crying because I knew my son was a murderer. I wasn't going to let him go to school today. I got up once I saw it was 7 a.m. on the clock, then brought myself back to walk closer to his room and sat out there until he woke up shortly after. I walked into his room, flicked his light on as he rubbed his eyes. I grabbed his arm and started dragging him out of his room. "Dad, why are you so sad? What happened?" He asked me, saying this in a way like nothing happened. I put my sandals on and put flip-flops on his feet, swung the door open and brought him out the house and slammed the door close. Ethan was still looking at me confused. "Dad, I need to get dressed and get my backpack for school." Ethan says, almost exclaiming. This was when I lost my cool. I had to let it out. "You know dang well what you did. You got up, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and murdered our cat in cold blood. You even tried attacking me. Mister, you're not going to school today. We're going to get you help." I yelled, veins forming in my neck and face. Ethan started to cry and I immediately felt bad for yelling at him, but I meant everything I said. Dick move, I know. What do you mean? I didn't get up." He cries. That's when he stopped crying for a split second, a look of realization forming on his face. "Wait, Ziggy's dead?" Ethan says in a high-pitched yell. "Yes, she's dead. Now get in the car." I say as I put him in the back seat, close the door, and get in the driver's seat. I looked in the rearview mirror at myself. I had dark bags under my eyes, my hair a mess, my goatee being the only thing on my face that remained the same. I started to drive as Ethan started wailing in the back seat about Ziggy. Why would he be crying? I thought. He's the one who killed the fucking cat. I drove a 15-minute route to a therapist. I booked an appointment on my phone a few hours earlier while I was grieving over Ziggy. As I pull in, I notice it's a pretty small building with very little windows except for the entrance. I got out and got Ethan out of the car, walked in and saw not too many people in there. As I walked Ethan into the office, he didn't seem to understand what was happening as he continued walking. The therapist came out of a room and greeted me as I walked in and we shook hands. He was a bit of a stubby man, around my height, toupee haircut, glasses, and a really nice brown suit and tie. "Hello, you're the father of Ethan, correct?" He says. I nod my head. "Correct," I say. He flashes a smile. "I'm Dr. Jack, by the way." He looks down at Ethan, just now noticing his wails. He suddenly turns stone-faced. He looks back up at me. "What happened?" He whispered to me. Look, I don't really want to explain it. Basically, Ethan keeps getting up in the middle of the night and just staring out of his bedroom window. And a few hours ago, he killed our cat. I struggled to get through that last sentence, and I looked down and scratched the back of my head afterwards. Oh my God. Dr. Jack says to me. He places a hand on my shoulder. I'll make sure we have a very effective session today. Are you going to stay out here and wait for Ethan to be done? I'm about to answer before I remember something someone commented on my last post. They had said that maybe, just maybe, a demon was using Ethan as a parasite. I stop cold while I'm answering Dr. Jack. I had to talk to the detective. I had to see if this is what he was going to tell me the other night. I was motionless for about a few seconds while having this thought, and when I finally regained my train of thought, I stumbled through words for a few seconds before finally I was able to say, actually, I need to go talk to someone for a little bit, but I'll try to be here when you're finished. Oh, alright. Dr. Jack replies. He should be done in about an hour or less, hopefully. Perfect. I say, starting to jog out of the building. Ethan starts to call out, Dad, don't do this, to me, but it soon cut out as Dr. Jack started to talk softly to Ethan as he walked him into his therapy room and closed the door. I hopped into my car, started it up as fast as I could, and started to drive all the way over to the sheriff's office. I needed answers. It only took me about 10-ish minutes to finally pull in. I got out of my car and ran to the glass doors and pushed them open. The lobby was full of people and my heart started to sink. I didn't have time to wait. If these people were also here to talk to him, I'm sure they were also urgent. But I needed to find out what the detective was going to tell me at my house yesterday. Luckily, I saw the sheriff walked close to the lobby to refill his coffee, and we locked eyes. His face turned from basically normal to his eyebrows widening, like he wasn't expecting me to show up. He sat his coffee down and walked up to me, shaking my hand. Hey there, is there anything we need to talk about regarding your son? He asked me in the middle of the lobby. Kind of. But I also need to know what you were going to say to me yesterday. The situation is getting worse, and please. He gritted his teeth and looked at me for a few seconds, thinking. He finally sighed and motioned for me to follow him. I followed him, not saying anything, and walked into his office. We sat across from each other. I surveyed his office. General cop stuff. His desk was full of sports junk and a couple photos of his family. He then tapped his pen on the table. So, what's going on with your son? He asked, leaning a bit against the table. I took a deep breath and struggled to find words. Well, he made more drawings, just like the one I showed you yesterday. He made 6 more to be exact. I told him. Do you have them with you right now? He asked. I shook my head and said no. He looked at his pen for a moment before looking back up at me and asking if that was all that happened with me. I dreaded having to tell him the next part. I wish. I say, letting out a nervous chuckle. I looked at the sheriff, dead in his eyes. A few hours ago, during the middle of the night, I woke up and I found that my son had killed our cat. After I told him, he dropped his pen to the floor and let out a look of anguish and sympathy. Holy shit, he murmured. I'm so sorry to hear that. Where is Ethan right now? The sheriff asks, trying to fix his face. He's at the therapist right now. I wanted to get him checked, but I decided to come over here because I remembered yesterday. What was there that you were going to tell me? He met my look, and I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't want to tell me. And I prayed that he would tell me. It had to have been important. Listen, I don't think you'll want to hear it. He starts to reply. My son is going through something, and I am too. I don't know what the fuck is going on, and what you were going to say must have been something that I need to know, so spit it out, Sheriff. I slammed my hand on his desk, and he cleared his throat. Fine. It's a lot to go through. Don't overreact, please. He says, adjusting his seating position. I fully listen now. When you were buying your house, there was something the sellers of the house were supposed to tell you by law, but I guess they didn't obey. I'm pretty sure they left the town, but, basically, your house is haunted by demons. My blood runs cold. I start to feel multiple emotions, and I could feel my eyes twitching. I stared at the sheriff dead in his eyes. And you didn't want to tell me? I raised my voice a 10. I know. I should have told you. But I hesitated and I wasn't sure if right then was the time. Sorry. You're telling me my entire house is haunted? I don't hold back as I exclaimed. The sheriff motions for me to calm down. No, well, yes, but the demons that are in your house only stay in one part of the house. I felt myself start to shiver. What part of the house are the demons at? I softly ask. The sheriff waits a moment before answering. Your son's bedroom window. That's where they all stay. I slammed my head on the desk and wrapped my arms around my face and started breaking down. There were demons in my son's room. I just couldn't hold it in. I wasn't afraid to let the sheriff see me like this. The sheriff waits for me to stop crying, and I do it for a couple minutes before recollecting myself. I run my arm across my nose before asking another question. Why are the demons in my son's room? In the window? Why? The sheriff shrugs. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this stuff. Based on the stuff I do know, though, is that the demons in your house have a fixation on the window. And anyone who stands a few feet away from it and an inch away from the end of the left side start to see things. Really disturbing things. And a lot of the times, visions of the future the demons are creating for whoever stares into the window. And when it's midnight, one of the demons calls out to you while you're sleeping, and it wakes you up and lures you to the window. Though I don't know why that happens. After seeing the visions, a demon takes your mind and controls you to do it. Whether it's 1 minute later or a whole day later, and over time, if it happens enough, a demon will possess its entire body. So the bottom line is, when your son ran away, when he killed your cat, that wasn't your son. That was a demon controlling his mind. The demons are targeting your son, and as long as he stares into the window, they will control his mind to kill everyone close to you and him, and eventually kill you too. The first night it happened, I don't know the full answer, but I think the demons, after 1 year, decided to stop waiting and call out to your son and get him to stand in front of the window. Thus, the voice he mentioned yesterday. It's never happened to anyone on this caliber because everyone stayed the fuck away. It can get worse anytime. All of that, everything he said. It was a ton to take in all at once, and I felt terrible for thinking Ethan did it all. I started running through scenarios in my head of how to fix this. To give me hope. What if I just sell the house and move somewhere else? I asked, hoping that was a solution. The sheriff shakes his head. It's too late now. The demons already have a fixation on your son. They won't let you leave. The sheriff says apologetically. What if I just smash and break the window? I say, snapping my fingers as I said it. Again, the sheriff shakes his head. No, never do that. If you do that, the demons will get pissed off and make your life a bigger living hell than they're already trying to do. Damn it, I thought. Well, is there any solution? I desperately asked the sheriff. Luckily, he nods his head. Yes, there fortunately is. Your son has stared into the window one too many times, so he's going to hear the demons in the house and do it no matter what now. Luckily, I have a friend that's a priest, so I can try and get him to go over to your house if it gets any worse and bless the entire house. I smile. That sounds great, but I'm worried about my son. Do you think he'll be okay? I cross my fingers underneath the desk. The sheriff slightly nods his head. For the meantime, yes, he'll be mentally okay for a while. And he'll always be physically okay, unless something sets the demons off. However, if he continues staring into the window and listening to the demons, it can destroy his mind and he'll lose his sanity, which is the demon's goal. He hands me a card with his number and tells me to call him if I needed the priest for a blessing of the house. I thanked him for everything, then walked out of the office and back to my car. I sat in my car for a while, processing everything I had just found out. My house was infested by demons trying to take control of my son so he could kill people and turn him insane. Definitely not worrying at all. There was a lot he said that I didn't understand, and quite frankly, don't ever want to understand. I looked at my phone after what seemed like only being a few minutes, and it ended up actually being 10 minutes that I was sitting in my car. Ethan's therapy session ended in just a few minutes. I was getting ready to apologize to Ethan once I got him, though I wouldn't explain this whole demon situation to him because, well, he's only 8 years old. I sped all the way to the therapist, a couple minutes late, unfortunately, and when I walked in, Dr. Jack was waiting for me with Ethan. Ethan looked fine and pretty joyful. He was happy to see me and hugged me. I hugged him back quite tightly. After the whole talk I had with the sheriff, I told Dr. Jack thank you, paid him, and prepared to walk out the door before Dr. Jack stopped me. The therapy session went pretty good, and I recorded the audio because my boss requires me to, and I think you should have the file because I think you need to hear the whole thing. Dr. Jack pulls up the MP3 file, and I could tell by the look on his face that it couldn't have been good. Okay. I reply as Dr. Jack texts the file to me. I look back at him, thanked him again as I exit the building, and I got Ethan back in the car and I start to drive home. I play Ethan's favorite song, Shivers by Ed Sheeran. Not a big fan of it, but the little guy loves it, as he sings along to it, but he stops his singing near the end of the song, as Ethan apologizes to me, saying he was sorry for whatever he did. I shook my head at him and told him that I was wrong, hesitated for a moment, and said that it wasn't his fault. Then whose fault was it? Ethan says as the song ends. I close my eyes as I continue driving, thinking of an excuse to tell him. Ziggy died of old age, Ethan. Nobody did it. I lie. But Ziggy was only 6 years old. Ethan points out. I knew that it was a terrible lie on my part. I know. I didn't know what else to say. After a while of driving, I finally pull into our neighborhood and pull into our driveway. Ethan asked if he had to go to school, and I said it was too late, and he seemed really excited. I laughed at his excitement as I unlocked the door and let him run inside. Later, I let Ethan watch cartoons in the living room. SpongeBob was on, I think. I walked into my room and closed the door and opened the message Dr. Jack had sent me, and sure enough, it was an MP3 file of his therapy session with Ethan. It was about 45 minutes long, so I'm not gonna recite the whole thing on here, but one part in it did stand out to me. It really did disturb me after hearing it, especially after knowing everything the sheriff had told me. I still keep shivering at the knowledge of there being literal demons in the house, even as I type this. Anyways, here's this part of the therapy session when I'll try to remember it as well as I can. Ethan and Dr. Jack. Therapy session number 1. 7:17 a.m. Dr. Jack. Moving on now, Ethan. Your father told me how you've been standing in front of your bedroom window. Is this true? Ethan. No, that's not true. Dr. Jack. Don't lie to me, Ethan. You can tell me the truth. Ethan. Fine. I keep hearing a voice coming from the window, and it keeps telling me to come here, and it keeps telling me where to stand, and when I do it right, I hear all kinds of whispers, and images flash in my head. Dr. Jack. What kind of images, Ethan? Ethan. I don't remember. But the last one I saw was of me walking into my kitchen, grabbing a knife, walking back into my room, and cut my cat, Ziggy, open. Dr. Jack. Did you do it? Ethan. I don't think so. Dr. Jack. And who is this voice you're referring to, Ethan? Ethan. It said that he wanted to be friends with me. He told me the whole world is a fucking bitch and everyone should die painfully. Dr. Jack. Ethan, who told you to use that kind of language? Ethan. I was just reciting what he said. I was at a loss of words, mainly the fact that this demon had been talking to my son. I didn't appreciate the fact that this demon was attempting to get friendly with my son. I decided that tonight, Ethan was sleeping in my room. It was not safe for him to be going back to the window. I also didn't condone Ethan swearing, but I forgave him in my head this one time. Nighttime came pretty quickly. Ethan got in his pajamas and was about to get in his bed when I told him he was going to sleep in my bed tonight. Why? Ethan asks as he puts his bedsheet over himself. Because if you do, I'll let you have donuts for breakfast tomorrow. I smile at him. Ethan's face lights up like a child on Christmas Day. Heck yeah, donuts! Ethan says, jumping out of his bed and running into my room to jump on the bed. I start laughing. I take one last glance at the window, sneered at it, knowing the demons were swarming it or something, and walked out of the room. The night, for the first time, was actually normal. Ethan never got to the window. I did wake up in the middle of the night and saw Ethan start to walk out of my room towards his. I got up and picked him up and brought him back into my bed. I held him close as I fell back asleep to avoid him getting up again to go to his window. I was more cautious now. The next morning, I gave Ethan donuts for breakfast as promised and got him ready for school because I figured today Ethan should go to school. It would give me time to have the day to think everything through without the worry of having to take care of an 8-year-old. I packed Ethan's lunch and slid it into his backpack as he got it on, ready to walk to his bus stop. I kissed him on the forehead and told him to have a good day. He said, "You too," then started to try and run towards his bus stop, acting like he was going to miss the bus, even though it was only 8 a.m., and the bus didn't pick him up until about 8:12. I went back to my room after I closed the front door and retrieved the sheriff's card from my nightstand. I needed the priest to come here and bless the house today. I wasn't going to wait until something else bad happened, because I needed this issue solved now. Ethan already tried going back into his room and to go back to the window last night. I dialed the number into my phone and put it up to my ear. The phone rung about 3 times before the sheriff picked up and told him I needed his priest friend to come and bless the house today. He asked me if something bad happened, and I told him not since Ethan killed the cat last night. He got up and tried going to the window. The sheriff agreed that we needed the priest to solve this issue, and he said that he'd call him and try to get him to come over to my house and bless the entire place, and he'd text me if he got an answer. I thanked him and hung up, and sat on my bed for a minute, smiling and patting myself on the back for being able to hopefully get this issue solved. The next thing I did only a few seconds later was embarrassingly stupid. I suddenly felt this urge in my stomach to go to Ethan's bedroom window. I wanted to see for myself exactly what Ethan was seeing every single time he stood in front of it. I knew deep down it was a terrible idea, but curiosity got the better of me. I looked at Ethan's room through his open door, put my phone in my pocket, and started walking from my room to inside Ethan's room. I looked at nothing else besides his window, focused on my question I wanted to figure out. I got past every toy in his room without stepping on them, surprising me because they were scattered around everywhere, as if they were bodies on a battlefield. I got to the window and remembered the exact spot the sheriff told me you needed to be in. I took a few steps back and got myself 1 inch away from the left side and looked at the window. Everything happened quickly in the span of only 1 second. I'll try my best to write it all out from memory. I'm not sure I'll be able to, without it being confusing. My vision suddenly turned a mixture of gray and red, sort of foggy, as reality felt like it was fading away. Like it was a Google slide transition, and eventually my vision turned entirely blank as I started to hear a mixture of whispers, all seeming like they were trying to speak to me at once, but they weren't taking turns. All their voices were different, but they also sounded the same in a way. They all had an aggressive monotone to their voices, and all of them had a huge echo to them. I couldn't make out everything all the voices were saying, but I could tell 2 things a couple of them were saying. Your son is ours, and you'll never escape us. I could feel my head start to turn numb, my brain start to crumble. These voices were getting unbearable. It felt like they were trying to kill me right then and there by destroying my head. I couldn't move away, though. I was frozen stiff. I had made a terrible mistake, but I was unable to think. The images I was seeing then started to turn into visions, and I started seeing one begin. And with the foggy sight I had, as this was going in front of my eyes, or head, still don't know how this was happening, I could distinguish myself laying in my bed, asleep, and Ethan standing over me at the side of the bed, raising something in his hand that I couldn't quite tell, and before it could all play out, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, which caused my body to shake a little bit, and my head jerked around, and I snapped out of the phase I was just in. I collapsed on my son's bed, and I started cursing at myself for deciding to do something like that. And I was horrified knowing my son kept having to deal with that every single time he was lured towards the window. Still a little shaken up, I reached for my phone in my pocket, turned it on, and saw that I had just got a text message from the sheriff, saying that the priest had agreed and said that he would be on his way immediately to bless my house. I texted back thanking the sheriff again, and I finally felt safe, knowing that the priest would make my life so much better, and turn it from literal hell back to peaceful. The priest showed up about 5 minutes later, and he introduced himself as Father Sam. He was a really cool guy, and he was really, and I mean really polite. He took his shoes off when he walked in, shook my hand, and even wiped off the cloak he was wearing before he walked inside. He had a fuzzy beard and nearly bald. I won't bore you with what I discussed with him, as I basically just told him my situation with Ethan, the window, and what I just did not too long ago. When I stood in front of the window, I was still pissed off at myself for doing that, and when I told him this, Father Sam shook his head at me and told me that it was remarkably dangerous of me to do such a thing. He started to bring holy water as he walked down the hallway to our rooms, and I asked him if he was going to sprinkle it all over the house. He said no, and that Ethan's bedroom window was the only thing we should bless because the demons left the rest of the house alone. As we walked into Ethan's room, I could see Father Sam smile, and he complimented the room, and I was heartwarmed and told him how fascinated he was with superheroes. I then cut to more questions I had. Before you do your blessing, what do the demons want with my son's body and mind? I say as Father Sam looked at me with graceful eyes. The demons that you and our mutual sheriff friend speaks of, based on my studies in the past, these kinds of demons are looking for a body to take advantage of, take over their mind and eliminate those close to them. And after a while of doing this successfully, they possess the body and very little can be done about it. Sometimes the body can get possessed if the demon gets angry enough. Father Sam explains. But what about my son's bedroom window attracts the demons? What drove them there in the first place? I almost cry out. Father Sam clicks his tongue, thinking for a while, then shakes his head. I'm afraid I don't know. When this house was first built, the demons just felt something about it and took over it. The house has existed for nearly a century. I don't know exactly about the window the demons find so interesting. I nod my head and ask him if he's sure the holy water will work. He said that it will either drive the demons away for good, or make them even more mad and do despicable things to both me and my son. Father Sam then steps to the window, avoiding stepping in the spot, and starts sprinkling the holy water all over the window, and a little on the carpet in front of him. Once he gets done, he mumbles a prayer I can't hear, and steps away from the window and smiles. The window is blessed, so the demons should hopefully be gone. He then gives me a look, but if the demons are still present, give me a call immediately. I nod my head and cross my arms. Yeah, I sure will. Thanks for your help. I say as he starts walking to the door. Before he leaves, he yells out, May God be with your soul, and closes the door. Some time passed and everything seemed normal. Ethan came home from school, did his homework, I cooked us dinner, and we played a quick game of Sorry. I beat him both times, but I said that he beat me instead so I could make him happy before he went to bed. I had Ethan sleep in my room again tonight because even though Father Sam had blessed that window, I wanted Ethan in my room just in case. I didn't hug him close to me like last time when he got up, but I did make sure he was close enough to me. We went to sleep pretty easily, luckily. 4 a.m., I woke up to the sound of quiet talking. I couldn't tell from where at first. I opened my eyes and saw that Ethan wasn't in the bed, let alone the room. My heart dropped as I heard Ethan's distant, faint talking from his room. Fuck. Before I could get up, I heard the sound of Ethan screaming in pain. I immediately shot up from bed and sprinted into his room. Ethan was standing in front of the window as he screamed, but he wasn't moving. Fuck this shit, I thought, and shook Ethan and turned him towards me to break the phase he was in. He immediately sat on his bed, gripping his chest. I was worried sick. Ethan, what happened? I say quickly. I could see blood on his chest from the inside of his pajama shirt. Ethan continued crying, but he was able to choke up the words. He hurt me, he cried. I automatically knew who he was referring to. Those goddamn fucking demons, haunting me and my son. Who hurt you? I say. I pull Ethan's shirt collar down and see a deep cut in his chest. Not deep enough to kill him or severely hurt him in the long run, but definitely enough to send him to the emergency room to get him checked out. He looked at me teary-eyed. It told me to get a knife and kill you. It wanted me to cut your throat. But I told him I wasn't going to do that, and he yelled at me and started scratching my chest and said he was going to rip my heart out. Dad, I'm scared. I picked Ethan up and ran downstairs, not responding, preparing to get him a wet towel to heal his wound and get him to a hospital. Doing all of this with one thing in my head. The holy water didn't work. All it did was make the demons even more pissed off. Part 4. Thank you to those who keep on reading these updates and are sticking with me through this entire situation. But I'm getting mentally drained and defeated having to constantly write out these posts nearly every single day. Since the end of my last post, absolutely nothing has gotten better. Shortly after I posted the last update in the hospital lobby, a couple of doctors came out to update me about Ethan. I closed my laptop and set it on a little table next to me and got up. So, what's the word? I asked them. Will my son be okay? The doctors, thankfully, nod their head. Yes, he will be fine. He will need stitches on his chest for a while, but you're lucky the cut wasn't much deeper. One of the doctors, who was a female, said to me. The other one, a man, proceeded to ask me, how did he get that large of a cut anyway? It looked like razor-sharp claws went through his chest. I opened my mouth and tell them everything. But I stopped myself because I didn't want to sound crazy, or make it sound like an excuse to hide that it was somehow me who did it. I wasn't going to go to a mental hospital or possibly jail for something I didn't do, so I lied. I honestly don't know. I just heard him crying in the other room and saw him bleeding, so I brought him here as quickly as I could. The doctors look at each other, then back at me. Alright, well, your son is good to go, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. The female doctor says to me, smiling, then walks back to her partner to retrieve Ethan. I was relieved he was okay, but then I started wondering, what if I didn't wake up? What if I wasn't quick enough to break him out of that phase? Why did the blessing Father Sam gave to the window work? Afraid, I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff and put it up to my ear. And I was already getting impatient by the first ring, almost bouncing in place. Checking the clock that was on the wall near the door, as I could hear stretchers of other patients rolling from behind me. Finally, the sheriff picked up. I must have woken him up from his sleep because the first thing he said was, "What?" in a groggy, irritated voice. Listen, man, I'm sorry to wake you up, but the blessing the priest gave to my window didn't work. I say into the phone in a sort of whisper so nobody else in the hospital could hear me. And as I said that, my ex-wife started to call me. I winced. What? It didn't work? How? the sheriff said, sounding immediately woken up by that very statement. Yeah, Ethan was at the window again, and he was actually talking to the demons this time. I guess they tried to tell him to kill me, but he didn't listen, and they started scratching deep into his chest to rip his heart out. Listen, come to the hospital. I need to take a phone call, I say quickly into the phone. The sheriff starts to say something, but I hang up to answer my ex-wife. Before I could even say anything, not even a second into the call, I could hear my ex-wife screaming at me through the phone. You let our son get hurt. You're an awful person. She screams almost exactly like a red fox, and she starts breaking down, crying. I try to calm her down, though I know what I was doing wasn't working. I don't know what happened. Just listen to me. I woke up to him screaming and I ran in and saw the bleeding. And I rushed him to the hospital. Look, I'm doing everything I can raising this boy. I raise my voice through the phone. Her sobbings settle down by a minuscule. What caused the cut in the first place? She hisses. I sigh and I stutter for a moment. It's hard to explain. Just come to the hospital and I'll talk to you about something serious. The sheriff is going to be here too. I tell her, knowing she probably won't listen. I hear her sniffles, but the noise was constricted. I felt like she didn't want me to hear her anymore. Finally, she spoke after what seemed like an endless second. She sniffed again and said, Okay, but I'm only doing this for our son. Then hung up. I keep my phone up to my ear for a few seconds after she hung up and looked down at my feet. God, I was a mess. I'm surprised I'm not already broken down in a mental hospital for all that I've been dealing with. I let my arm lower from my ear slowly as I slip my phone into my pocket. Defeated, I walked back over to my chair and slumped down on it, ignoring an older man trying to speak to me, asking if I'm okay. He walked away after he sensed I wouldn't respond. I wasn't in the mood for a conversation right now anyway. My rest is short-lived when the entrance doors blast open and the sheriff walks in, startling everyone in the lobby. Everyone stares at him, fearful. Sorry everyone, the sheriff says, letting a slight smile show. Didn't mean to scare anyone. There's no emergency at the moment. He rushes through his sentence and approaches me and lifts me from my chair, surprising me as he did it. How? He said, leaning his face close to mine, his eyes showing that he was scared. Scared just like me. How did the blessing not work? He whispers loudly. He holds onto my shoulders as I struggle to let words out. I don't know, I say in a depressed tone. The sheriff cleared his throat and let go of me and put his hands in his pockets. Okay, well, I guess I just have to call Father Sam again. Did he tell you what would happen if the blessing didn't work? The sheriff eyed me. I nodded. He said that the blessing would either work or would just make the demons pissed off. I answer. Do you think the demons tried killing your son because he disobeyed them, or because the blessing just made them mad? The sheriff asked, scratching his neck. Both. I said, not bothering emphasizing. I still don't know Ethan's full conversation with them. I say as I look through the hospital windows and see my ex-wife's SUV pull into the parking lot. Have you told anyone else about this? The sheriff says as he looks at where I'm looking. I watch my ex-wife get out of the car and begin speed walking towards the hospital doors. Yeah, I told my ex-wife. I say, looking away. I hear the sheriff chuckle. Your ex-wife? You have an ex-wife? The sheriff laughs as he tries to stop, coughing in the process. 2 of them. I start to lightly laugh with him as my ex-wife explodes through the front door. She sees me and the sheriff in the middle of the lobby, and she walks towards us. She looks at the sheriff. "Hello, Sheriff." She greets him. She then looks at me and gives me a snobby look. "So, Sheriff, my ex over here told me that you needed to tell me something about my son." The sheriff looks at me, unsure if he should tell her. I nod at him and he looks back at her. "Ma'am, your son's bedroom window at your ex-husband's house, it's infested with demons. They lure him towards it and he goes into a blank state and hears voices and visions of the future. Terrible things. And once the time has come for the vision to happen that they planned, they take control of his mind, and they'll continue until they're able to possess his whole body. I forgot to mention this to your ex-husband, but sometimes if he's at the window enough, sometimes they'll get into his mind uninvited. I can't explain it all in full detail here, but I will when we're in a more contained area. Father Sam knows more than I do, though." The sheriff explains. My ex looks lost. "What? Who's Father Sam?" She clearly doesn't know what to say, and I feel bad for having her hear all about this. "He's a priest. He's my friend. He tried blessing his house, but it didn't work," the sheriff says, as Ethan gets taken out of his hospital room and towards us. Upon seeing him, my ex-wife rushed and hugs him tightly and asks if he's okay. I can hear him saying that he was fine, that he was okay. Man, I hoped he would remain okay until we get all this figured out. The sheriff leans into my ear as Ethan and his mother hug each other, and she tells him everything is going to be alright. "I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what we can do anymore. I'm sorry, you might just have to live with this." The sheriff apologizes to me and begins to walk towards the door, kicking his feet. I step in front of him and talk to him before he can exit. "No, there has to be something we can do. You're just going to let me and my son be in danger forever? No, I need Father Sam's help. We can't give up," I say to him. He shakes his head. I look at Ethan walking over to us, showing curiousness on his face to what's going on as my ex-wife stares at me and the sheriff. I can tell for the first time in years she actually looked concerned for me. The sheriff looked down at Ethan looking at us, holding his stitched chest, then sighs and looks at me. "Fine, I'll call Father Sam and tell him to go to your house for the night and help you get the demons away. Take your son to his mom's house so he doesn't interfere by standing in front of it. This is a last resort. If it doesn't work, then you're screwed." I think about that. If the blessing didn't work, what else would work? Bless the house again? Yeah, right. But I had to try. I had to try for Ethan. I had to try for my family. "Alright, let's do it," I say. "What's he gonna do?" I say, holding Ethan close to me. The sheriff rubs his chin. "I don't know what he'll do. He's the priest, not me. You'll have to trust him," he says, pulling out his phone. "I'll call him and let him know. Let Ethan go with his mom tonight, for his sake." He then begins to call Father Sam after saying that and walks out of the hospital. My ex-wife comes over and grabs Ethan's hand and looks at me. A look of empathy. "Good luck. I mean it this time." I look at her in the face and I forgot how beautiful she really was. As I'm about to say something, she then hugs me, but then breaks away a second later, realizing what she did. We both pretend to cough and clear our throats. I itch my ear awkwardly. Yeah, take care of Ethan tonight, please," I say. I look down at Ethan and rub his head, then start to walk out the hospital. "Dad, where are you going?" Ethan asks me as I begin to walk out of the hospital. I stop and turn around to look across at Ethan. I'm gonna help this family. I'm gonna help our house. Get some rest tonight, buddy. I smile at Ethan as he waves to me and says goodbye. As I get in my car and start it up, I sit there and think for a moment. Will I really be able to solve this? I wasn't confident, but I had to do everything I could. Love is stronger than fear. I couldn't let the demons feed on my fear. I started my car and started my drive back to my house. Once I got home, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything for the whole rest of the day. I slept, looked back at my son's drawings, and ate. I ate a lot of food throughout the day. I also drank. I drank a lot, also, throughout the day. I think I was drunk by the time it was almost 8 p.m. I had fallen into a deep sleep at the kitchen counter, my head laid out and my arms flat out. I bet that if someone had seen me like that, they would think I was dead. I was awoken by the sound of someone knocking on the front door. My eyes shot open, and I shot myself into a straight seating position. Confused as my head was aching and my legs were cramped. I struggled to get up and even walk to the door. That's how bad of a shape I was in. When I opened the front door, it was Father Sam, here to help me yet again with the demons in my household. He greeted me but saw that I must have been drunk and tired. He immediately pushed me lightly and set me down on the couch. I tried speaking, but I was too dizzy to say anything. However, I could hear Father Sam speaking to me. I know the blessing didn't work, and like I feared, it made the demons mad. What I think is, the holy water put them in a really bad mood last night, and the disobedience your son showed contributed to that. Thus the scratching that ensued. You're lucky you saved him just in time, otherwise he would have been done. He was just a few seconds away from being off this earth, off chasing butterflies with the Lord. I promise you. Though, I will solve this tonight and help you and your son. Father Sam's son. In a very preachy way. I opened my eyes a little bit more, my vision not as blurry, my head not as dizzy, and saw Father Sam had a big book in his hand. I pointed to it, still not able to speak too well. What is that? I struggled to speak. Father Sam showed me the page he was on. It's a prayer in my book. The prayer, once I read it out, will be sent out to the demons and will wipe them all out. You will have to try your best to stay quiet and not interrupt. This is a prayer that is very powerful, and I can only do once here. Father Sam takes a step back. You rest. I will get it all sorted out for you. And with that, Father Sam ventured off down the hall, trying to find Ethan's room. I can hear the sound of him pushing open the door of my son's room and making his way near the window. And as I listen, I hear and feel my phone ringing in the kitchen. I felt much more alert and healthy than I did before, though I still had a bit of a headache, which hurt like a bitch. I made my way into the kitchen and picked up my phone. It was my ex-wife. I frowned and picked up and put it to my ear. Hello? I said, interrupted by my ex-wife's cries. I immediately get worried. Ethan's gone. I don't know where he went. She continues crying, and I can feel my heart beating 1,000 miles per hour. I wasn't there. I don't know where my ex-wife now lived. I can't just go out and try to find him. How? Did he run away? Why would he do that? I say, and she said she didn't know. And the last she saw of him, he was sitting up in his bed, staring right at his wall, not moving at all. Once I heard that, I had a strange feeling in my stomach. Butterflies, to be exact. Okay, call the police and file a missing child's case. I say as I pass by the back door, and I notice as I walk by the door that there was a giant hole in my backyard. Last time I saw, there was not a big hole in my backyard. I saw this because my back door is made of glass, so I saw it very easily from the corner of my eye. I stare at it as I hear Father Sam begin his prayer. I slowly open the back door and walk out as my ex-wife tries talking to me. My ears drown out her voice as I make my way closer to the hole in my backyard, and I realize that the hole was where Ziggy's grave was. Someone had opened it. I looked in and saw that Ziggy's body wasn't there. I had a terrible feeling, and I could feel myself shaking in fear, ready to scream, but I didn't want to interrupt Father Sam's prayer. My ex-wife could hear my small, fearful sounds. "What's going on?" she asks. I start to slowly speak to her in a quiet tone. "Ziggy's grave. Someone opened it and took it." I could hear her gasp as I walked back towards the door, but then I heard something swinging around from the side of the house. I tell my ex-wife I heard something, and I lower the phone and I walk slowly to investigate the side of the house. I take small steps, afraid that I was going to find something terrible. I finally turn the corner to face the side of the house, and I was right. It was the corpse of Ziggy, slowly decomposing, swinging around on a long string, her arm twisted around terribly. Whoever had done this had done even worse shit to her. I scream at the sight of this. I didn't care, and I put the phone back up to my ear. Someone put Ziggy's body on a string on the side of my house. Now it's swinging around. I was interrupted by the screams of Father Sam. "I have to call you back," I say to my ex-wife. I quickly hung up and sprinted inside and sprinted past the living room and down the hall. I turned into my son's room and saw Ethan choking out Father Sam against the wall, with a large knife raised, preparing to impale Father Sam with it. But I knew it wasn't Ethan. "Ethan!" I scream, and Ethan turned to face me. His eyes were pale, white eyes, and I remembered those were the eyes of the thing he had drawn a few days prior. He dropped Father Sam in his place and let him slide down to the floor, as Father Sam started coughing. Whatever was controlling my son's mind then jumped over the bed and started making his way towards me. I was terrified. How the fuck did they get into his mind? He wasn't even home. I scream at Father Sam as he gets closer and closer to me. Father Sam keeps coughing, but he is able to cough his answer around. "The demons found their way to Ethan's location. I don't know how. All I know is that we're doomed," Father Sam says, still coughing. He sounded like he was in bad shape, and I was going to bed in bad shape sooner rather than later. Reminder that Ethan is not really Ethan. The demons were fulfilling their wishes. Ethan swings his knife towards me, and I use my right hand to grab his wrist. I wasn't sure that if I fought him, that if Ethan himself would feel the pain or if the demon would feel it. I don't want to take a chance. I use all the strength I have to push Ethan's hand down and bend in, and Ethan goes down to a knee. I continue pushing down and I put my left hand down on his hand as assist. I continued pushing down, and I could hear the demon struggling inside of Ethan's problem, but instead of showing pain, he just started laughing. Whichever demon was controlling my son's mind, he was laughing at the fight I was putting up. I continued pushing down on his arm with all the power I had, at this point believing the demon would feel the pain and not Ethan, but before I could do anything else, Ethan let out a devilish roar and overpowered me easily and blasted me back first into the wall that I was already pretty close to, and I swear I could hear some bones in my back cracking. I let out a pained yell as I still heard Father Sam coughing and saw Ethan walking his way towards me, tightening his grip on his knife. He took a wild swing with his knife down towards me, and I quickly rolled out of the way, and the knife went all the way through the wooden door. I got up as the demon slowly pulled the knife from the floor, and I kicked the knife out of his hand, and it flew down the hallway into the entrance to the living room. Ethan started laughing. This demon motherfucker was in my son's body, and there's nothing I'm able to do about it except to somehow protect myself. We will be able to possess your son's body, whether you like it or not. It roars at me, and I get even more scared after hearing its full voice. And it isn't until I remember that these demons did to my son last night. They had tried to kill him for disobeying what they told him to do. That's when all my fear got thrown out the window, and I got an adrenaline rush. Ethan threw a punch at me, but I ducked it, and he punched the wall instead, and left an enormous dent in it. He turned around to face me, and I pushed Ethan against the wall, and I punched it across the face. The demon can definitely feel the pain because the demon let out a grunt as I punched him. With this knowledge, and I continue punching Ethan across the face as the demon kept letting out grunts of pain, but it never went down, and I don't think I've ever punched harder in my life. I yelled at the demon controlling my son's mind and went to punch him again, but this time it caught my hand, and it started to grin at me in my son's body as it started to slowly twist my hand around, attempting to snap it. It was abnormally strong, and I was afraid my hand was going to be broken for the rest of my life as I felt tremendous pain in my hand. Before Ethan was able to do it, I was able to kick him square in the shin, and it let go out of shock from the kick. Before I could follow up with another attack, Ethan grabbed my throat and started to choke me out, and I was starting to slowly lose oxygen and get my neck broken. He was squeezing hard as Ethan looked down at me, giving me an evil, wicked grin. That's when there was a knock at the door, and I heard the sheriff's voice call out my name and say, "Your ex-wife told me to come over here to search for your son and see if he's here. Can you let me in?" The sheriff yells out. Ethan's head snaps to look down the hall at the door as it growled, and it roared out, "Enter if you want your friends to die." Right after it said that, I could hear the sheriff start to try and break down the door. Ethan let go of my throat, and I dropped to the floor and started gasping for air. It was difficult to breathe. I saw Ethan stand at the end of the hallway, waiting for the sheriff to make it inside. After a few attempts, the sheriff was able to kick down the door, and he ran out with his gun drawn. He turned to his right and saw Ethan standing down the hall, and the sheriff instantly knew that his mind was being controlled. "Look, you evil waste of sperm. Get out of that boy's mind. Stop attempting to possess his body, and leave that window. I'm warning you, I will blast you the fuck away." The sheriff yells. The demon in my son's mind doesn't react. I look at the sheriff, and the sheriff looks at me. "But if you shoot and kill the demon, doesn't that kill Ethan too?" I say, still gasping for air. The sheriff shrugs. "I don't know. I don't think so, but I might have to shoot this fucker before I find out," the sheriff says. He looks back at Ethan as it widens its grin, and it walks towards the sheriff. I could see the fear on the sheriff's face. "Stay back." The sheriff yells, his finger shaking on the trigger. Ethan doesn't stop and makes it right in front of the sheriff, and he tries to grab his gun, but the sheriff headbutts Ethan back and lets out a grunt. The sheriff shoots Ethan in the hand, and the demon lets out a screech, and I cover my ears after hearing that terrible sound. The sheriff points the gun at Ethan's head, but it quickly recovers and grabs the sheriff's hand and moves it up as the sheriff pulls the trigger, and the bullet goes up to the roof. Ethan takes the gun out of the sheriff's hand and grabs him by the hair and points the gun at his face as I hear it chuckling. The sheriff struggles to get out of its grip as I'm forced to watch. But I was going to fight until the end. I make my way after catching my breath and call out to the demon that was trying to take over my son. If you are going to kill someone, I start to say. Ethan hears me and slams the sheriff down on the wooden floor and turns around. Ethan's eyes were getting more pale now as whatever was in his mind stares at me and laughs and repeats itself. If you're gonna kill someone, take me, motherfucker. I spread my arms as a sacrifice. I look at the sheriff from behind Ethan, and he looks at me, shaking his head. I was fine with this fate. I did everything I could to protect my son. Just then, Father Sam came limping out of the room, just now catching his breath. Ethan's attention quickly shifts to Father Sam, and he points it at him and pulls the trigger. The bullet pierces through his chest, and Father Sam collapses to the ground as I jump at the sight. Now, it's your turn. The roar comes from my son's mouth. I look at the pale eyes of the demon that replaced my son's, my heart beating harder than before now. Now I felt like I had to avenge Father Sam. The gun gets pointed at me, but before it could pull the trigger, I run towards it and grab the gun and point it towards Ethan's face. I could see its face turn from confidence to actual fear. I made this demon in my son's mind actually scared. I then shoved the gun out of his hand and dropped it to the floor. It went for a punch across my face, but I ducked it and got behind Ethan and put it in a chokehold, squeezing as hard as I could, knowing that the demon could feel it, hoping that it would somehow get squeezed out of my son's head, though I knew it would do nothing. I have it in the hold for quite some time as I could hear it struggling, before it grabbed my arm and head and threw me over itself and slammed me hard on the wooden floor, laying me out and knocking the breath clean out of me. I watch as the sheriff gets up for one last stand as Ethan turns around to face him. The sheriff goes to grab the demon, but it sidesteps and grabs his hand, and he bashes his face into the wall twice. He drops him to the floor, the sheriff now unconscious. I could see blood running down his forehead, his nose fractured. I look up as Ethan looked around at our bodies and laughed hysterically. I'll spare you two for now, it calmly says, though still laughing. It then stares down at me, no longer laughing. Your son's whole body, though, it will be ours soon. It growls. Those words, that growl, it genuinely terrified me. Ours. It says one more time, and I watched as Ethan's eyes, going from a pale white color to normal, and Ethan now himself again fall to the floor. I breathed a sigh of relief and crawled over to my boy, and held him close to me as I hear police sirens in the distance. I watch as the sheriff regains his consciousness and slowly sit up, blood still all over his face. We look at each other, tired and hurt. Our end is near, the sheriff mumbles to me. I nod with the room given on the floor. Yeah, I respond. But this is for my son. I'm not going to let the demons win. I'll find a way to beat them. I'll find a way. The last sentence got drowned out as 2 police cars pulled into the driveway, and 4 cops ran in, helping everyone up, asking what happened, and calling a medic for Father Sam. Well, all of this was happening, as my house was filled with the lights of the cop cars making their way into the house. All I could think about was that fight, and how much my son had mattered to me. I always knew he mattered, but I never realized that if anything ever happened to him, I would probably jump off a bridge. I would take a bullet for his sake. That's what I tried doing. I promise everyone as I type this in an interrogation room early in the morning, I will try to find closure in this. It probably won't be soon. I might die in the process, but I won't let the demons win. I won't let them possess my son's body. I will fight until the end. Part 5. I had realized how shaky I was and how rushed my writing had seemed in my last post. I was fearful for the inevitable future, overcome with the dreadful thought that the evil that laid in my son's bedroom window had already won. If anyone has any idea, please tell me what it is about Ethan's bedroom window that attracts the demons. As I'm writing this, I have slim to no idea. I was sitting in a cold, isolated interrogation room, and no detective had come in for the past few hours to ask me questions. I was fine with that, though, because I knew how insane my whole story would sound. However, I had the sheriff on my side. That is, if he was even okay enough to speak, considering that he literally got his head bashed against a wall twice. When I got shoved into a cop car, even more cop cars came, searching the place. There was about, I'd say at least 5 cop cars by that time. If you're wondering why the cops came in the first place, it was because my neighbors were calling 911 because of noise complaints. They didn't find any clues to suspect that it was me. All they found was Ziggy's body hanging on the side of the house and blood splatters all over the hallway. The cops, unfortunately, didn't have the heart to put Ziggy's body back in her grave and instead just left her there. That broke my heart. Medics also came onto the scene quickly and put Father Sam on a stretcher. He looked like he was in lethal condition. There was blood all over his chest. He was loaded onto a stretcher as 2 cops drove me away from my house, on their way to the police station as I watched. They never told me what they were doing with Ethan. Luckily, the detective finally came into the room after what seemed like years, and he introduced himself as Detective Jones. He wore a fedora, and he took it off as he sat down. He was completely bald. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out what looked like stacks upon stacks of papers, looking like it weighed about 100 pounds. He asked me about what happened at the house, and I told him the whole story. Everything. Even the demon shit. I know he didn't believe me, but it was the best I could really do. There was nothing I could lie about. We were in there, with me recalling everything I knew for about an hour. Detective Jones was nodding his head, writing notes down the whole time. I'm not going to bore you with any more details that happened within that hour. Detective Jones led me out of the room where he motioned 2 cops to come over. I saw handcuffs in their hands as Detective Jones looked at me. I felt my attention shift its focus onto only him, as I couldn't believe what was happening. My eyes started watering. I was unable to speak, and it seemed everything in the world went mute, except for the words Detective Jones spoke. I'm sorry, but this seems all like a crazy and stupid excuse for your actions. You're under arrest for attempted murder, assault on an officer, and putting your son in extreme danger. Detective Jones spoke to me. I retrieved all my senses back. What? No, it wasn't me. I started to scream at them. The cops cuffed me, hands behind my back. I tried resisting, but they slammed me into the wall, cheek shoved up against it as they tightened the cuffs on my wrist. I thought all hope was lost. They pulled me away from the wall and began trying to walk me down to a jail cell, with me still resisting. Not caring if I got tased, I wasn't going to get arrested when I had a son to try and protect. Before the sheriff shoved the doors open, his face with stitches on his forehead and a gauze pad on his nose as he quickly stops the 2 cops. No, he didn't do it. Don't arrest him, the sheriff ordered. The 2 cops obediently uncuffed me. I shook my wrists after feeling the pressure of handcuffs for the first time. Detective Jones looks at the sheriff confused. But sir, it couldn't have been anybody else but him. Just look at what he said, Detective Jones says, showing the sheriff his notes. The sheriff shakes his head. No, it wasn't him. I can't explain who did it because... The sheriff stops for a second, then continues. There's something supernatural going on at that house, and we're trying to solve it. I don't want you guys getting involved. Speaking of that, the sheriff points at me. I need to talk to him for a moment. If you would please leave the room. Detective Jones takes a big breath and sighs as he and the two other cops leave the room. The sheriff watches as they leave and turns back to me. Is Father Sam okay? After, being shot? I ask the sheriff. Yeah, he's alive, thankfully. He's in really bad condition, though. He's gonna be in the hospital for a long time. He sighs. So now we don't have a priest to deal with this shit. I say, raising my arms. Yeah, I guess we don't. He stops mid-sentence and his eyes widen. Wait, actually, I think I know a way to conclude this demon shit. Then let's do it, I exclaim, not thinking twice about it. Alright, but we need your son and ex-wife for it, the sheriff says. Why? I ask. I don't want to put them in danger. Ethan's already been through enough. I know, the sheriff says, but we need all of us for this. We're going to do a ritual. I remember reading in Father Sam's book that one of the ways to scare demons off is performing a ritual where they are at. There are multiple other ways, but this is the easiest. I whip my phone out of my pocket. Well, I trust you. Let them know, I say, calling my ex-wife. She picked up on the second ring and asked immediately what happened to Ethan. I told her everything that happened at the house, the massacre that took place, the huge brawl, and that I had no idea where the police took Ethan. I told her what the sheriff's idea was, and that he needed her and Ethan for it. She agreed to it pretty quickly, surprisingly, and told me to find Ethan as quickly as I could. I said I would and hung up. Do you know where Ethan is? I asked the sheriff right as I hung up. They took him to some evaluation room at the hospital. We need to get him out of there as quickly as possible. We don't have a lot of time, the sheriff says, getting out his keys. After that, we got out of the police station and got into the sheriff's cop car and drove right to the hospital. We parked and rushed in and asked to see Ethan at the front desk. The receptionist asked who I was, and I said I was his father, but she saw the sheriff and let us see him anyway. We pushed open the door to the evaluation room, where a doctor was asking Ethan questions about whatever the fuck. Next thing I know, the sheriff reaches into his holster and pulls out his pistol and points it at the doctor. I look at him with shock drawn all over my face. I'm not going to shoot you, but I'm going to need you to bring the boy over. It's important, the sheriff says, shaking his gun. The doctor, without saying anything, brings Ethan over to us, and Ethan hugs me. The sheriff puts his gun away as the doctor starts crying. Without saying anything, we leave the hospital with Ethan and get back in the car. What was that all about, dude? I asked the sheriff, buckling myself in. I'm the man of the law, the sheriff says. I'll do anything to help out a friend, though. Dad, where are we going? Are you getting arrested? Ethan asks from the back seat. I turn around to look at him. I smile. No, buddy. We're going back to our house and the sheriff is going to help us with our issue, I say. Ethan doesn't respond. Instead, he starts fidgeting with his fingers. About nearly 10 minutes later, we make it to my house, still taped up, where my ex-wife was already waiting for us. She must have snuck in. No cops were present on the scene. We walked in and my ex-wife hugged my son and asked the sheriff how we were going to do this. The sheriff looks at Father Sam's book he brought in. We're going to go into Ethan's room, stand around his bedroom window, and I'm going to read out a sentence on this page right here. He points on the open book. My ex-wife gives a look. Don't you think that's a bit dangerous? Since we know what the window does to people? When she said that, I remembered what I saw when I looked into the window. Even in present time, I'm still terrified by just a slight remembrance of it. The sheriff shakes his head. Yes, but not if we don't stand in the exact spot. If we don't, then we'll be okay. He looks down the hall and lets out a slight breath. Let's get this over with. We all walk down the hallway where all the blood splatters from the other night were slightly cleaned up. I could see my ex-wife close her eyes at the sight. She held Ethan close and covered his eyes as well. The sheriff motioned everyone into Ethan's room and stepped towards the bedroom window. Ethan and my ex-wife did the same. I hesitated for a second, then stepped to it as well. The sheriff started telling us where to stand. Him to the right of the window, me to the left of the window. Ethan and my ex-wife in front of it, though they were making sure not to stand in the exact spot where Ethan and me stood and saw the visions and hear the whispers. Ethan was closest to me and my ex-wife was the closest to the sheriff. Ready, everyone? The sheriff says. We all nod, fearful. We all have to hold hands for this to work. He looks up from his book and motions for us to do it. I grab Ethan's hand and Ethan grabs my ex-wife's hand, and she grabs the sheriff's hand. The sheriff uses his other hand to read from the book. All right. The sheriff looked nervous. I would be too, now that I think about it. He started reading, though starting to look like he was struggling with the first word. Apostle of God, I hereby declare the demons to... The sheriff started to chant. He stopped suddenly. I look at him and he just stares at the book, not doing or saying anything. Continue, I say to him. He doesn't reply. Me and my wife look at each other. The sheriff drops the book and lets go of my ex-wife's hand. Still as a robot, his breathing getting heavier. I continue looking at him, now more concerned. Continue reading, goddammit. I shout at him. Don't you understand? Suddenly, at the speed of light, the sheriff pulls out his gun and shoots me point blank in the stomach. I get knocked back instantly, my vision getting blurry from the blood that spilt on my face. I groan. I hear my ex-wife and son scream, and as I see from my red vision, the sheriff grinning ear to ear. He then points the gun at my ex-wife without even looking at her, and shoots her in the ribs. She falls back onto Ethan's bed, coughing up blood, holding onto her wound. Ethan continued to scream, screaming, "Mom, Dad," over and over. The sheriff roughly grabs Ethan on the shoulder as Ethan tries fighting away, but the sheriff wouldn't budge. He forces Ethan to stand in the spot, a few feet away from the window, and an inch away from the left end. I see Ethan go into a blank state as blood oozes down from my stomach. The sheriff extends his arm towards Ethan, looking at the window. Here he is. The sheriff says to the window, "You can fulfill your prophecy." Right after he says that, as I realize what is going on, Ethan suddenly gets lifted in mid-air, levitating, arms extended down and his legs bent, his mouth open as he yells, but is muffled by an evil laughing. I witnessed this happen to my son for a good 30 seconds before he finally drops to the floor. I see Ethan look down, moving his hands around the body, then smile, and I hear the laugh, a deep, evil monotone with an echo to it. I see his eyes, the pale, white eyes. I see Ethan look at me on the floor, and it sinks into me. Ethan has been possessed. I watch as the demon in my son's body turns to my ex-wife and starts laughing at her as well. As she tries to let out a scream, but she winces when she tries to, and she holds on to her wound harder. I don't know what else happened after that, because the sheriff grabs a black paper bag, walks over to me and put it over my head. I blacked out a second later. I woke up in an abandoned warehouse, in a large room that was completely empty besides a couple large steel doors on either side of the room. I clear my eyes and see that my wound on my stomach was stitched up, and I look around the room and see my ex-wife tied up, her mouth covered with duct tape and her wound on her rib stitched up as well. I look to the middle of the room and see my possessed son, and that dirty bastard of a sheriff. Look who decided to wake up. The sheriff laughs. Fuck you. I say to him, standing up. The sheriff continues to laugh. Watch your language now. Your son is in the room. He points to my son. Oh, wait. He's possessed. He laughs even more now, with the demon in my son's body laughing too. Why would you do this? I ask the sheriff. Why would you let my son get possessed? The sheriff stops laughing and looks at me dead in the eyes. Why do you think I did it? He says quietly. My possessed son speaks up. Now that I'm in your son's body, I'm going to end this world. It's going to end in anarchy. Everyone will die quickly. But you? You will die slow. You will die painfully. It says, grinning ear to ear. I couldn't bear to see my son like this. I knew this wasn't my son. So this is what we're going to do, the sheriff says, walking over to me. I'm going to shoot you in every single limb in your body and let you bleed out on the floor. Then, your son, he laughs after saying that, your son will then cut your ex-wife's organs out, every single one of them that are in her torso. He smiles. I stare at him dead in the eyes. Why don't you just let us die? I ask, getting in his face. Because we want to kill you a better way than just shooting you. I just shot you to keep you down, so you didn't get in the way of what I was trying to do. The sheriff answers. He pulls his gun from his holster and holds it to my left thigh. Look at your ex-wife one last time, and admit to her how much you still love her. The sheriff hisses. My ex-wife looks at me. A look of love. Are you sure I'm just going to let you do this? I whisper to him. He lets out a smirk. What do you think I am? A dumbass? I smack the gun out of his hand and it slides across the cement floor. He looks at the gun sliding, then looks back at me, pissed. I kick him in the stomach and knock him down to the floor. I turn my head and see the demon in my son's body walking towards me with a knife in hand. I see one of the large doors a few steps away from me. It gets towards me and I shove it away to buy me time. I pull open the large door, grab my possessed son, and throw it out of the room into the other room, which looked like a storage room. I quickly slam the door shut and lock it. It started banging against the door, roaring at me, stabbing through the steel doors with such force, freaking me out. Untie me. My ex-wife tries to screech with the duct tape across her mouth. Okay, I say, trying to kneel down next to her. Right as I do, the sheriff comes up from behind me and grabs the back of my shirt and throws me down to the floor head first. I quickly hold the back of my head while trying to crawl away and get up. The sheriff forces me up and faces me, then pushes me. You don't have to go through the struggle of being the hero. The sheriff mocks. It's not going to work out. I sneer at him. I thought we were friends. Guess you're just a devil-worshipping bitch. Yes, I am. The sheriff laughs. He immediately goes to punch me. I move out of the way and catch his arm and start pushing it out, attempting to break in. He yells out in pain, then stomps my toes. I let go and wince at the pain. As the sheriff punches me across the face, I could feel some bones in my cheeks break at the force of his punch. I return the favor with a punch of my own. The sheriff gets knocked down, but he catches himself. He sprints at me full speed and tackles me down. He starts beating the shit out of me, smashing his fist down on my face relentlessly, not holding back. I thought right then and there that was going to be the end of my life. I wasn't going to fall yet, though. I had to defeat this fucker, then defeat the demon in my son's body somehow. I could still hear it smashing itself into the large steel door from the other side. I shoot my hands up right as the sheriff was going to punch me on the ground again, and grab his head and start gouging his eyes. He stops what he's doing and starts screaming in agony. He was trying desperately to break away, but I kept shoving my fingers into his eyes, trying to put him through as much pain as humanly possible. He was able to break away and shoot himself back, away from me before I could do much else. He was still screaming in pain. He got back up, his back facing me, his hands up to his eyes, yelling out every swear word in the book. I got up and started approaching him. I then grabbed him and started putting him in a chokehold, trying to make him pass out. He started struggling to breathe as he tried to break out of it. I heard him gurgling and I knew I had won this fight. He was 1 second away from passing out before he elbowed me in my stitched up stomach wound. I let go of him and I was having trouble even breathing. I turned my back on him, trying to catch my breath again. I could hear him walking and picking up the gun from the floor behind me. I turn around and see him pointing the gun at me only a few feet away. I could see his wicked, evil smile. Goodbye. It was nice knowing you, pal. The sheriff grimaces. He reloads his gun, and right as he's about to pull the trigger, I charge at him, running faster than Usain Bolt on a marathon, and grab the gun. We start getting into a tug of war with the gun, trying to take the gun away from one another, the head of the gun pointing up in the air. I get a sudden wave of adrenaline, and before he even realized it, I took the gun clean away from him and smacked him across the face with it. I point the gun at him and he puts his hands up in fear, seeing the scenario he was now in. I could feel tears forming in my eyes as I said, "Goodbye. It was nice knowing you, pal." To him. He opened his mouth to say something, but I already pulled the trigger. Everything seemingly went into slow motion as the bullet shot out, and I watched as the bullet went right into his head, blood exploding from his skull, seeing him die instantly. The sheriff slumped to the ground, lifeless, blood leaking out of his head like a chocolate fountain. I drop the gun to the floor as my ex-wife starts crying at the sight of me killing a man. I continue listening to the noise of my possessed son grunting and continuing to slam itself into the large steel door. I then remember about my ex-wife. Weak, I run over to my ex-wife quickly, kneel down and begin untying her. It only takes me about 5 seconds, but I'm able to untie her and rip the duct tape out of her mouth. She looks at me and I could tell how scared she was. You killed him," she cries. I look down at the floor. "Yeah, I know," I say. Before we could say much else, my possessed son just then blasted itself through the large steel door, knocking it down, making a large crash, the noise echoing throughout the entire warehouse. I watched as my possessed son turns its head to look at me, its pale white eyes gazing upon me. It growls. I step in front of my ex-wife, trying to protect her. "Call 911, I murmur to my ex-wife. She immediately refuses. "No, I'm not doing that. They're going to arrest you because you killed the sheriff. They won't believe anything you say," my ex-wife whispers. "Just do it." I loudly whisper back. My ex-wife grabs my shoulders, letting out a cry, then pulls out her phone and starts to dial 911. I look back at my possessed son, looking into the demon's eyes that replaced my son's beautiful, delightful blue eyes. I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else, I say to it. It continues growling at me, preparing to attack, looking at me like a predator looking at its prey. I'm the one you're supposed to hurt. You were always supposed to target me, so why don't you do it just now, huh? I could hear my ex-wife talking on the phone as my possessed son took a step closer to me. I was no longer afraid. I was ready to fight until I fell, to save my family, to save my son from this demon. Its eyes turned completely black, his pupils turning red, his breathing getting louder and louder, his growls sounding even more angry. Finally, it speaks to me. Your son is ours. It roars to me. The roar louder than a screaming crowd at the Super Bowl. Your son is ours. It roars again at me. Before I could turn around and tell my ex-wife I still loved her, my possessed son then lunged at me and swiped at my face, letting out a deafening roar. Right as it swiped at me, it felt like the entire world had changed in an instant. My ex-wife was gone. The sheriff's body was gone. The entire warehouse was red. Hell, it looked like the entire world was red. The only thing that remained in color was my body. Everything else looked vastly foggy. I looked around, surveying this new world I was in, not quite understanding what was going on. I took a deep breath, prepared for my last stand. Where are you? I yell at the demon, loosening myself up. Part 6. I look around the warehouse some more, scanning for anything out of the ordinary in the large, empty room. It was really hard to see anything because of the fog that was blocking my view of everything in sight. I started walking through the fog, throughout the room, continuing to shout for the demon to come out in my son's body. The room started getting hot, so hot to the point it felt like the sun was crashing down and colliding with the earth. I was getting ready to give up, to just fall to the ground and let the worst happen to me. I was getting tired, weak, and demotivated. That was what I was about to do until I saw the fog clear in front of me and saw my possessed son standing in front of me. The noise in the room turned to a large, reverbed ambience. I stare at it. I still refuse to call this demon that was in my son's body a him or her and try to gain my energy back. It stares back at me. I can tell from the look in its eyes it was ready to rip me to absolute shreds. You've terrorized my son and me for too long, demon. I say to it directly. I'm going to leave you feeling more pain than you have ever felt in your entire existence. It starts chuckling in its still terrifying, deep, monotone voice. It quickly stops after 2 seconds and starts twitching every bone in my son's body. It then looks back at me. You're in my world, it calmly says to me. My possessed son puts his hands on his hips and his chest and face get pushed forwards. And the demon that was in my son's body pulls itself out of my son's body, and my son collapses after he does so. I finally get a good look at the demon in person. It was exactly like the drawing Ethan had made. It was very tall, though it's decreased its size a bit to meet my height. It was all black like a void, and of course its pale white eyes. I could see its teeth too. Every single one was as sharp as a tungsten needle. Of course, I knew it would be scary, but seeing it in its full form in person, it scared me shitless. It grits its teeth at me. When you're in my world, there's no choice but to meet your fate. It extends its arm, and I see its large, sharp claws on its hands. I quickly realize how dangerous this fucker is. But if I was going to go down, I was going to go down fighting. I look at him and think about how stupid I am for what I was about to do. But I didn't listen to my conscience. Are you sure about that? I say to the demon, trying to hide the shakiness of my voice, trying to hide my fear of the demon. I then reach my arm out and grab one of its eyes and start attempting to pull it out of its socket. It starts letting out pained roars as it tries getting my hand away, using all the strength I had left to do so, but the demon swung its arm and used its sharp claws to cut deep into my wrist, which was practically a stab, causing me to let go and hold my damaged wrist. It stung like a bitch. It then grabbed me by the throat and started choking me. I already felt the life begin to leave my body. The demon throws me, and it throws me all across the room, right into the wall of the warehouse. I dropped chest first onto the floor, and I thought my spine had broke because of the impact of the throw, but it surprisingly wasn't. I lay on the floor, groaning in pain. The demon quickly walked up to me and grabbed me by the hair and lifted my face up so I could look at it. It sneered and smashed my face into the cement floor, then forced me up and slammed my back first into the wall. It opened its mouth, preparing to bite my face off as I gasped for air, but impulsively, I put my hands on its jaw before it could bite me, and kept it open as I somehow got out of its grip. I look at the wall and bash its teeth into the wall, so hard that I saw some of its teeth chip and fall to the floor, clinking around as they made impact. The demon held its hands to its jaw and started grumbling as it started bleeding purple from its mouth. I go to strike the back of its head, but it suddenly swings its entire body around and clubs the top of my head with its fist and knocks me to the floor. I roll over on my back and cough. I cough a lot, holding my chest to prevent myself from vomiting. I watch from above as the demon extends its right arm out and makes a large black trident appear in its hand. It grins as it raises its foot and brings it down, trying to crush my head. I roll out of the way in time and get up. I unleash my fury on the demon, punching it multiple times in the ribs, chest, and face. I do it to the point my knuckles were getting red and were physically hurting. After every single punch I did, though, the demon was not fazed by any of them. The demon grabs my neck and swings the side of its head right across my face. I stumble back, nearly knocked out, almost falling down multiple times as I moved back. I watch as the demon raises its trident and throws it like a spear towards me. The trident goes into my left shoulder and I immediately feel the pain and I cry out. The demon speed walks towards me, grabs the end of the trident and pushes it deeper into my shoulder. I go down to a knee because of the pain and continue crying out. It puts its hand back on the trident and shoves it out of my shoulder, blood shooting out of my shoulder like machine gun bullets. I hold on to my shoulder, my breathing getting heavier. The demon raises its trident again and brings it down to stab me in the head. I use my right hand and catch the trident to try and hold it back and get back up on my feet. I put my left arm on it as well for assistance, though I know it's doing little work because of my injured shoulder. The demon was overpowering me relatively easily, and I knew I was going to lose this fight in a gruesome way. I move myself to the side of the trident and kick the demon in the back of the knee. It almost goes down and lets go of the trident to catch itself. I take advantage of this and stab the demon in the chest once it regains balance. It roars in pain as I stick it deeper into its chest, purple blood leaking from its chest, and it puts its hand on the trident trying to take it out. But I continue pushing it deeper in, not allowing it to gain control of it. Finally, I let go of it when I feel the tip of the trident reach its back on the inside. The demon looked in bad shape, and I knew I had done some serious damage to it. I smirk at it, witnessing the intense pain it was in. As it looked down at the trident in its chest, it looked back at me and began laughing like a maniac. I get confused. This fucker should be dying by now. I stuck a trident deep in its body. It should be on the floor bleeding out. Instead, it uses one arm to place it on the trident. The fear I had that slowly faded away just a few seconds ago was rapidly coming right back, as the demon slowly pulled the trident out of its body, showing no pain whatsoever, and dropping the trident to the floor. I watch as the huge stab wound in its chest starts healing by itself, by an outside force. Flesh crawling back into place, and within 10 seconds, it was as if it wasn't seriously hurt by anything. It continued laughing at me, ready to pounce on me. I was ready to accept my fate, giving up until I remembered the first half of the prayer that the sheriff was saying when we were at the window in my son's room before showing his true colors. I stepped closer to the demon and looked at it directly in the face. I could tell it thought it had won. The look quickly faded as I said the quote from Father Sam's book that I had memorized when the sheriff read it. Apostle of God, I hereby declare the demons to... That's about as far as the sheriff got. I stopped for a second, thinking of something that Father Sam would write for a prayer, until I thought of something and continued. Be sent down and walk down the stairs of hell and face Christ. I wasn't sure it would work as it sounded like nonsense, but the demon's face automatically looked like it was glitching, and it started twitching around violently, while making gurgling noises. Its whole body soon started glitching, and it looked twitching around as it let out screeches, and I realized that the demon was finally feeling true pain. It was showing weakness. The demon went down onto its knees, continuing to glitch, twitch violently, and screeched. It looked at me the whole time as it did this, even though it had no facial features. I looked at its eyes and I could tell that it was giving me a pleading look. It reached its twitching and glitching arm out to me. It started to speak in a distorted, broken voice that went from high-pitched to low-pitched in every word it spoke. Please, I beg you, don't do this to me. I'll give you anything you want. I'll give you money, fame. I'll make you the king of the world. I'll make you rule the world. You can't do this to me, it said. I shook my head at it. As I felt all my anger building up, I took a step closer to it as it looked up at me. I lost all the dread I had because this fucker was going to get what was coming to it. All I want is my son back, I say to it in a biting tone, and that's not something you'll give me. It continued glitching and twitching around as I pulled my arm all the way back, and as it roared at me, I swung my arm at its face and punched it right in the face. A Mike Tyson caliber punch, and its entire body shattered like glass right as I did it, and it turned into a billion different pieces, every piece scattering all over the floor, its roaring voice quickly fading away, becoming one with the air. I stared at every piece of it on the floor, before all of it quickly disintegrated, sizzling down into the floor. I let my arm rest and I laughed, a triumphant laugh, knowing I had won. I then realized Ethan. I saw Ethan still on the floor, but I saw him regaining consciousness. I sprinted over to his side as he saw me. He screamed, "Dad," as I slid across the floor towards him and hugged him, as the red colored world around me and all the fog disappeared, and I returned to the real world where I saw the sheriff's body, my ex-wife, and blue and red lights flashing from outside. I saw my ex-wife see me return from the demon's world, and she ran over to me, repeatedly saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." I stood up when she got close, and we held each other and embraced, telling each other we loved each other. This whole situation was terrible, but it did bring me and my ex-wife back together. Next thing I know, About a dozen cops enter the room with their guns drawn, looking at me and looking at the sheriff's corpse. Ethan started asking me what was going on as my ex-wife started realizing what they were going to do with me. I was about to tell Ethan the cops were going to help us before a cop roughly grabbed me by the arms and handcuffed me. Multiple cops started to come over to me, and another multiple cops went to the sheriff's body and were investigating it. What the hell? I yell at the cops that were putting me in cuffs. My ex-wife starts yelling at them to let go of me, and Ethan started yelling, "Sir, you're being arrested for taking hostage of the sheriff and murdering him, as well as pulling a gun on a doctor," one of the cops say sternly, and started walking me away from my family. They were right. I had killed the sheriff. Unfortunately, they wouldn't believe me if I said he was a devil worshipper and tried to kill us. I never pulled a gun on a doctor, I shouted at them. What about the murder of the sheriff? One of the cops shot back. I stayed quiet. I tried to look back at my family, but one of the cops prevented me from doing so. My ex-wife still continued telling the cops to let me go, but they quickly shoved me out of that room and continued shoving me through every door in the warehouse until we got outside, where there were multiple cop cars parked around it. I didn't see my ex-wife or Ethan again after that. I never got to ask my ex-wife if she wanted to get married again. I never got to see Ethan again. They shoved me into a cop car as two cops got in the front and drove me away from the warehouse, and as I glanced at the warehouse, I knew that Ethan was in there. Confused on why I was being taken away, screaming at all the cops in there that I was innocent. I started to cry, knowing I probably would never see him ever again. Before they took me into the police station, I asked to see Father Sam in the hospital first. They refused at first. Then after a second of me asking, they finally agreed and said I had 2 minutes to talk to him before they took me out and took me to jail. So that's what I did. We pulled up to the hospital and they walked me through the doors all the way to the room where Father Sam was being kept in. I was still in handcuffs, so I didn't have any freedom still. We made our way into the room and I saw that Father Sam had a ventilator around his mouth, had a sheet over his chest, and was hooked up to life support. The cop sat me down in a chair next to Father Sam's bed and exited the room. It wasn't really comfortable sitting down with handcuffs on. Father Sam was awoken by the door slamming. I could see his eyes open in a flash. He turned his head over to me and smiled when he saw me. "Oh, it's you." He coughs. I smile back. "Sam, I killed the demon," I say to him. His face turns from just smiling to full-on joyfulness. "You did?" he says. I nod. "Yeah, I had to go to hell and back to do it." "Where's the sheriff?" Father Sam asks, still joyful. My face goes cold. I struggle to find the words to tell him. Well, we went to my house and into my son's room. He was reading a prayer from your book to scare the demons away, but he stopped, shot me and my ex-wife, and had my son get possessed. I explained the rest of it to him. How he took us to an abandoned warehouse with the demon and my son. How he was a devil worshipper the whole time, and how I killed him. He looked devastated after I told him. "Oh my," he said. "Yeah." I say. I looked down, disappointed for having to tell him. But I found out what it was about the window that attracts the demons. I finally figured it out, Father Sam says. I look up at him. "You did?" I say, my eyes lighting up. Father Sam sits up slowly before letting the words stream out of his mouth. "Your son's bedroom window? It has this supernatural force to it, a force that the demons like to feed upon, A force that gives them their powers, a force that makes them incapable of dying unless you say the prayer in my book, and adds to their need of possessing somebody. The window is able to. Before Father Sam is able to explain anything else to me, the cops open the door to the room, grab me, and say it's time to go and force me out of the room. Father Sam's face goes pale as he sees me being escorted out of the room. As I yell to Father Sam to send me a letter in jail, telling me the rest, but the cops closed the door before I could finish my sentence, making Father Sam incapable of knowing what I was asking for. On the drive to prison, I was grateful for having that newfound knowledge, but pissed I wasn't able to hear all of it before the cops barged into the room and took me out. Once I got to the prison, I was quickly treated for the wound in my shoulder and wrist, and by that, they basically just wrapped up my wrist in cloth and did the same for my shoulder. I gave my lawyer my laptop and account info and gave him the last 2 updates writings on paper for him to write out and post for all use, since the jail wouldn't let me do it myself before taking me to my cell. Bastards. I'm scared of the thought of jail, but I'm actually fine with this ending to my story. I know I went out a hero. I saved my son. That's what mattered. My ex-wife is going to take care of Ethan from now on, taking custody of him since I'm going to be in jail. I feel extremely depressed knowing that I never got to say goodbye to my son, and that I'll never be able to see him again. I appreciate you all for reading and sticking with me and supporting me throughout everything that has happened to me, and especially my son. It helped me get through a lot. However, this is how it's going to end. The demon terrorizing my son dead, transformed into nothingness. I love you, Ethan. You're the most important thing in the entire world to me. Breaks my heart that I will never see your face again. Not even when I'm on my deathbed. We did it. We won.